How to Stop Caring About What Others Think, by Audible Insights. Introduction. You've been walking through life with a weight on your chest, constantly aware of who might be judging you, dissecting your every move, and deciding if you measure up. It's not just an idle worry. It's the quiet panic that maybe, just maybe, their opinions define you more than your own sense of self. That's the struggle we're here to transform. And by the end of this journey, you won't merely feel a little freer. You'll inhabit a fundamentally different reality where others' judgments no longer hijack your decisions, your self-worth, or your path forward. Imagine standing in front of a mirror and noticing how you subtly adjust your posture, your expression, even your spirit, to fit an invisible script you never asked for. There might be a moment of clarity when you see just how many voices are clamoring in your head: family, friends, strangers on social media, and how few of those voices are truly your own. This isn't about dismissing every piece of feedback or ignoring wise counsel. It's about breaking free from the relentless grip of approval, seeking and unlocking a life where you can finally exhale without waiting for someone else to nod in agreement. We'll walk this road together, but know from the start that this isn't another quick fix to plaster over your anxiety. We're about to dismantle the structures that keep you chained to the judgments of others. You'll see how and why you got here, and more importantly, how to shift the entire foundation so that external opinions become passing breezes instead of hurricanes. We'll shine a light on the hidden fears, unhelpful beliefs, and unconscious habits that perpetuate the cycle of craving acceptance. You'll learn to spot them, question them, and replace them with truths that set you on a course defined by your inner compass. There might be moments of discomfort and even fear as you begin to step away from the old patterns. But that discomfort is where the real transformation happens. The chapters ahead serve as guideposts that, when followed earnestly, will let you reclaim your sense of self. Each chapter tackles a distinct aspect of caring too much about what others think, and each is designed to spark a specific shift in how you perceive, feel, and act. You will find insights rooted in empathy and lived experience, ideas meant to cultivate genuine change, not just superficial reassurance. By listening to these words, you're signaling that you're ready for something deeper. You're ready to leave behind a life that tiptoes around the edges of other people's opinions and step into one that radiates from the core of who you truly are. This means embracing parts of yourself you've kept hidden, learning to stand firm when others disapprove, and discovering the unshakable confidence that wells up when you know you're no longer performing for someone else's script. The path may feel vulnerable at first, especially if you've spent years conforming to expectations that never aligned with your inner truth. But vulnerability is the price of admission for an authentic life. As you move through each chapter, let the ideas spark self-inquiry and action. True freedom from external judgment emerges from the inside out, and this audiobook will guide you step by step to that liberating vantage point. When you reach the other side, it won't be about wishing you'd done it sooner, though you likely will. It will be about living in such an honest way that the fear of disapproval no longer stops you. You'll have a brand new relationship with yourself, marked by an ease and lightness you might only have glimpsed before. Now, take a breath, settle in, and prepare to cross the threshold into a reality where what truly matters is who you are, not who others think you should be. Chapter 1. The weight of approval. Sometimes it feels like you're carrying a secret burden, one that grows heavier each time you sense disapproval or sense that you're being judged. Maybe you've become skilled at hiding the tension. It shows up as a clenched jaw, a tightness in your shoulders, or a rehearsed politeness whenever you step into unfamiliar social territory. This chapter is about illuminating just how pervasive and exhausting that effort can be. We're not trying to judge your need for approval. We're merely acknowledging the invisible tax it imposes on your emotional and mental well-being. Recognizing the cost is essential because it anchors our journey in truth rather than abstraction. Consider those quiet moments when you question if you said the right thing, wore the right outfit, or reacted with the right amount of interest in a conversation. It's as if there's a hidden scoreboard tracking your performance, and each slip feels catastrophic. Reflect on how many times you paused before speaking your mind, worried about rolling eyes or whispered criticism. The mental energy spent on these micro-calculations adds up, leaving less room for creativity, joy, and genuine human connection. The shift we're working toward here isn't simply deciding to ignore everyone's judgments. That would be too simplistic and, frankly, unrealistic. Instead, this chapter invites you to see how deeply entwined these approval-seeking patterns are with your sense of identity. It's about confronting the fact that when you tune your self-worth to other people's preferences, you live in a constant state of anxiety, always scanning for cues, always adjusting. That constant monitoring can feel normal if you've done it for most of your life, but once you recognize its toll, you'll find the desire to break free becomes undeniable. You might begin by noticing exactly when and how the fear of disapproval surfaces. It could be in small social interactions or in significant career decisions. If you can name the settings and emotions that trigger your need for others' acceptance, you create a map of your vulnerability. Without bullet points or rigid steps, think of it as an ongoing observational practice. You're not condemning yourself. You're simply gathering information, much like a researcher quietly takes notes. The act of paying attention can itself instigate a subtle shift in your perspective. Suddenly, the invisible weight of approval becomes visible, and once it's visible, it becomes optional rather than inevitable. You might also experiment with doing one small thing that feels truthful to you but risks mild disapproval. Maybe you voice an unpopular but honest opinion in a safe setting. Or you show up somewhere wearing something that expresses your personality rather than adhering to the norm. When you do this, pay close attention to how you feel. Is the anxiety of potential disapproval overshadowed by a quiet surge of self-respect? Do you sense a new level of authenticity seeping into your interactions? That hint of inner satisfaction can become a powerful motivator, reminding you that the discomfort of risking judgment pales in comparison to the relief of living in alignment with yourself. As you conclude this chapter, recognize that naming the cost of approval seeking is the foundation of all future steps. When you appreciate the weight you've been carrying, you become more willing to set it down. There's a kind of relief in admitting how tired you've grown from constantly checking if you're worthy in someone else's eyes. And in that relief lies a flicker of hope. Hope that as we move on, you'll transform that burden into something far lighter, fueled by inner validation rather than external permission. Chapter 2. The Illusion of Control. You might believe on some level that if you just say the right words or adopt the right demeanor, people will form the exact opinion you want them to have of you. That longing to shape how others see you can be rooted in admirable intentions. Maybe you want harmony, or you hope to be understood. But real life is far more complex than any single performance. People interpret your words through their personal histories, biases, and moods. This means you have far less control over their perceptions than you imagine. This chapter aims to free you from the exhausting effort of trying to choreograph what's inherently unpredictable. Reflect on moments you meticulously planned how to present yourself, perhaps in a job interview or a first date, only to discover you couldn't stop someone from misreading your intentions. It feels like a personal failing, yet it reveals a universal truth. Even your most painstaking efforts won't guarantee the response you desire. There's an undercurrent of frustration, disappointment, and sometimes despair that accompanies this realization. Yet in fully embracing your limited control, a surprising sense of liberation can arise. You discover that your energy is better spent on embodying honesty rather than striving for an ever-shifting ideal. This chapter's core transformation lies in shifting from futile control to self-trust. Instead of curating every nuance of your behavior for fear of judgment, imagine deciding that your role is to be authentic while allowing others to respond from their own truths. Instead of carefully planning each remark, you speak more spontaneously, trusting that you know how to be polite while still sharing your genuine perspectives. Notice if a new lightness enters the conversation. Notice how others might respond with more sincerity because they sense your honesty. That doesn't mean you suddenly stop caring about empathy or respectful communication. It means you recognize that no matter how carefully you craft your words, some people may still misunderstand or judge you. By accepting this, you reclaim the bandwidth you used to waste on second-guessing every interaction. You can test this by easing up on your self-editing in smaller, lower-stakes situations. Let's say you're at a casual gathering. Crippling self-consciousness, by contrast, is an endless loop of worry about how every gesture, joke, or pause might be perceived. The shift occurs when you decide that the outcome of others' opinions is not your burden to carry. This reframes your focus. Do you want to connect or do you want to impress? Do you want to engage or do you want to control? At the close of this chapter, take a breath and imagine letting go of the ropes you've been pulling, trying to direct every outcome. The moment you realize that authenticity, not perfection, is your strongest tool for meaningful connection, you begin to see the old habit of micromanaging impressions for what it is: an unwinnable game. You might also pay attention to the difference between helpful self-awareness and crippling self-consciousness. Self-awareness involves being mindful of others' experiences, acknowledging the impact of your words, and caring about what's kind or reasonable. There's a sense of self-respect in recognizing your responsibility ends with being true to your character, your values, and your intentions. Paradoxically, people often gravitate more to those who aren't frantically seeking approval because authenticity is refreshing and magnetic. This sets the stage for our next chapter, where we'll dive even deeper into how outside voices get so entangled in your inner dialogue, and why learning to separate them is essential to your freedom. Chapter 3. Whose voice is in your head? Listen carefully to your inner narrative the next time you hesitate to speak up or decide against taking a bold step in your life. Often the voice that stops you isn't your own. It could be the echo of a parent's admonitions, a teacher's criticism, or a cultural script handed down through generations. You've unknowingly adopted these voices as your reality, letting them guide your choices long after the original speaker has left the scene. This chapter revolves around recognizing which messages and beliefs aren't actually yours, and then rewriting them in your own authentic voice. Consider the first time you realized you were holding back from expressing yourself. Maybe it was in childhood, perhaps at a dinner table where speaking out of turn drew a sharp look or a reprimand. Over time, you learned to avoid that disapproval by staying quiet. Even as an adult, the fear of stepping on toes or inviting a scolding can persist, though the actual threat no longer exists. This phenomenon extends to nearly every domain of life. You might pursue a safe career because a teacher once implied your creative ambitions were foolish, or you might downplay your successes because a peer group you once admired valued humility to the point of self-denial. This chapter's core shift is about separating your genuine desires, fears, and motivations from those inherited voices. Imagine shining a flashlight into a dark attic, illuminating old boxes of dusty memories and half-buried criticisms. As you rummage through these boxes, you begin to realize which thoughts are truly your own and which were planted by others' expectations. This process demands both curiosity and a willingness to see yourself in a new light. You may feel sadness or anger when you understand how much of your life has been choreographed by scripts that never belonged to you. Rewriting these scripts can start with small declarations of autonomy. Let's say the old voice in your head says, "Don't draw attention to yourself. It's safer to remain unnoticed." You respond silently but firmly, "I have a right to be seen and heard." This isn't about forcing yourself into the spotlight if that doesn't resonate with who you really are. It's about distinguishing genuine preference from an inherited fear. If being more visible aligns with your inner truth, challenge the old voice and risk being noticed. Observe if there's a sense of relief or expansion that follows, a subtle yes in your body that signals this path is yours. There's also power in setting boundaries around external influences, especially if you still have relationships where people criticize, belittle, or undermine you. You might find yourself limiting time with someone whose commentary triggers the old scripts, or you might calmly state that you're no longer interested in unsolicited advice. Doing this can feel risky, especially if you fear losing connections, but it also paves the way for relationships that honor your evolving sense of self. Each time you set a boundary, You're giving your inner voice permission to become stronger and clearer. As we finish this chapter, you might feel a sense of momentum building. Once you see how outside voices invade your inner world, you can't unsee it. There's a determination that emerges when you realize you've been living by rules that were never truly yours. The next step is to rebuild your sense of worth on a foundation that reflects your own values. That's where we'll go next, exploring how to construct a rock-solid sense of self that doesn't depend on the passing whims or deep-seated biases of others. Chapter 4. Redefining Self-Worth. Think about how you evaluate yourself in moments when you feel insecure. Do you tally up achievements, recall compliments, or compare your life to someone else's highlight reel? Our culture often teaches us that self-worth is something we earn, as though it's a currency measured in praise, admiration, or social status. But living this way sets up a fragile system, because the moment external validation wavers, your self-worth comes crashing down. This chapter challenges that dynamic by guiding you to cultivate an internal gauge of value, one that doesn't fluctuate whenever someone approves or disapproves of you. Reflect on how you might have learned to tie your sense of worth to performance or accolades, perhaps from well-meaning parents who praised you primarily for success, or from peers who only showed support when you matched their ideals. Over time, you might have started believing that you're only as good as your last achievement, your appearance, or how well you fit into someone else's template. Recognizing the transient nature of external validation can feel unsettling at first, but it's also your ticket to something more stable and authentic. This chapter's major pivot is to shift from external validation to internal self-respect. Imagine standing in a crowded room where everyone has an opinion about you, yet you remain centered, neither inflated by their praise nor deflated by their scorn. That centeredness arises when your self-worth is no longer a negotiation. It's anchored in how you treat yourself, the integrity of your actions, and the values you hold dear. It doesn't mean you stop appreciating kindness or constructive feedback. It simply means these things don't make or break you. One practical way to start is by noticing how you speak to yourself when you feel inadequate or criticized. If your internal dialogue is harsh, you can gently begin to replace it with a more compassionate tone. You're not sugarcoating everything or excusing poor behavior. You're acknowledging your inherent dignity, which exists regardless of any external measure. Another step might be choosing actions that align with your values, even if they don't garner the approval you're used to seeking. It might be something as simple as staying true to your personal ethics in a group setting or refusing to let your identity revolve around superficial standards. Pay attention to the quiet confidence that starts to grow once your identity is rooted in self-respect. You'll find a new resilience, a calm strength that doesn't hinge on other people's fluctuating opinions. This transformation won't happen overnight, but each instance of tuning into your inner sense of worth is a small investment that yields profound returns. You begin to understand, on a visceral level, that you're enough on your own, and that no external praise or criticism can change that fundamental truth. As you reach the end of this chapter, let yourself imagine a life where you walk into any social or professional space and feel grounded in your inherent value. The thought might seem distant now, but remember that you're slowly building the internal scaffolding to sustain it. Next, we'll delve into the often surprising relief that comes from being misunderstood and why not everyone's going to get you, and why that's perfectly okay. Chapter 5. The Freedom of Being Misunderstood. It can be terrifying to think someone has the wrong idea about you. You might scramble to defend yourself, clarify your intentions, or adjust your behavior so they see you in a more favorable light. Yet there's a strange kind of freedom in recognizing that not everyone will understand you, and that such misunderstandings don't have to be disasters. The attempt to ensure everyone views you the way you want to be seen quickly becomes a prison, one in which you contort yourself rather than live authentically. Picture a moment when you realized someone disliked you or misconstrued your motives. Did you feel compelled to fix their impression, or did you trust that your character would speak for itself over time? The habit of always trying to correct how people see you is exhausting and often futile. This chapter aims to shift you from a fear of being misunderstood to an acceptance that comes with clarity about who you truly are. This acceptance doesn't mean you never clarify a misunderstanding when it matters. It means you no longer do so out of desperation for approval. Sometimes you realize that the person's viewpoint is so filtered through their own biases that no explanation will suffice. In those moments, learning to let it go can be an act of profound liberation. You stop fighting for space in someone else's narrative and instead invest your energy in living your truth, confident that the people who truly matter will eventually see the bigger picture. One way to nurture this perspective is to consciously remind yourself that others' opinions, even if incorrect, are shaped by their life stories, not yours. They are carrying beliefs, resentments, or insecurities that color how they interpret your words and actions. Yet, you'll also begin to sense relief. Relief from the constant self-editing and the draining attempts to ensure everyone's narrative lines up perfectly. By granting others the freedom to see you as they will, you claim your own freedom to live without incessant worry. You'll find yourself letting go of certain battles, focusing instead on relationships that nurture and respect who you genuinely are. By internalizing this truth, you alleviate the burden of believing you must fix their lens. A second approach might be to reflect on a time you misunderstood someone else, only later to see them differently. That experience can cultivate empathy for how misunderstandings arise naturally and are often nobody's fault in particular. You might feel anxiety or even sadness when you allow someone to walk away holding an untrue perception of you. As this chapter closes, you may sense an emerging readiness to face the fact that not every connection will be a perfect fit. Accepting the possibility of being misunderstood paves the way for meaningful, authentic bonds with those who genuinely resonate with your core. This sets the tone for what comes next, where we'll explore how approval can morph into an addictive cycle and why breaking it is essential for your ongoing transformation. Chapter 6. Breaking the approval addiction. There are moments when you find yourself waiting to see if someone likes your post, waiting for a nod of recognition from a colleague or a friend, waiting for an invitation or a compliment that tells you you're on the right track. This kind of waiting can become a habit so pervasive it feels normal, and over time it morphs into a subtle addiction. You repeatedly seek the emotional rush of validation, even if it's short-lived. When that external affirmation doesn't come, you might feel a hollowness or even panic. The truth is, it's less about the like or the compliment and more about the comfort you temporarily find in knowing that someone, somewhere, approves of you. In this chapter, we confront the cycle of craving, reward, and inevitable crash that characterizes the approval addiction, and we illuminate how to break it once and for all. You may have noticed that after receiving a dose of approval, a supportive comment, a kind word, you feel uplifted for a little while. Yet that high fades unless it's continuously replenished. This sets the stage for dependence, as you look for more and more reassurance just to maintain a baseline sense of worth. Perhaps you change your plans to align with what seems most likely to earn praise. Or you hold back from sharing a bold idea, fearing that if people dislike it, they'll turn their disapproval toward you personally. Over time, this pattern can narrow your life until you're living within tight parameters, defined by other people's acceptance. Breaking free starts with the recognition that external validation is fleeting fuel. By relying on it, you're left with no stable reservoir of self-worth. For many people, the roots of this approval addiction go deep. Childhood experiences, cultural narratives, or lingering insecurities can trigger a cycle in which you believe you must do things right to remain lovable or accepted. But as you become aware of this dynamic, you can begin dismantling it piece by piece. Rather than quit cold turkey, you might first observe how often you seek little hits of approval. Do you subtly fish for compliments by downplaying your achievements? Do you feel uneasy when no one comments on your updates or checks in on you? This awareness isn't meant to shame you. It's meant to help you understand how embedded the pattern might be and how frequently it shapes your decisions. You can begin unwinding the habit by allowing yourself small moments of pause when you crave validation. In that pause, ask whether your next move aligns with who you are and what you value, or if you're driven by the need to maintain someone else's good opinion. This creates a moment of clarity. If your desire to seek approval is front and center, challenge it by doing the opposite. Maybe you share your honest opinion, even if it might not be well received. Maybe you let a silence linger, instead of rushing to fill it with a self-deprecating joke that will make people like you more. These small acts are surprisingly powerful because they show your mind that you can endure potential disapproval without falling apart. You'll likely encounter discomfort, maybe even a sense of withdrawal, as you stop chasing the tiny highs of external validation. That's natural. Each time you resist the urge to secure someone's approval, you're retraining your nervous system to find steadiness in your own convictions. In time, you'll discover that the absence of constant reassurance makes space for something more profound, a growing trust in your inherent worth. This is not a one-time event, it's a gradual shift. With consistent practice, you'll notice a deeper calm and a new kind of autonomy emerging. There's a certain peace that arises when you're no longer compelled to check every move against someone else's opinion. Instead of perpetually scanning the environment for validation, you connect with a quieter sense of self. You might discover hidden strengths or unacknowledged preferences you never explored because you were too fixated on pleasing others. You reclaim the energy once spent orchestrating people's responses to you. As you embark on this process, remember that lasting change often involves lapses. You may catch yourself reverting to old approval-seeking habits now and then. The key is to see these moments not as failures, but as opportunities to strengthen your new stance of self-trust. Chapter 7. The Power of Indifference. It sounds harsh at first. The idea of indifference can conjure images of callous disregard. Yet there's a difference between apathy and the healthy kind of indifference that arises when you stop letting other people's opinions dictate how you feel. True indifference doesn't mean you refuse to care about anyone at all. It means you stop being hijacked by judgment or rejection. You're free to listen and engage, but you're not held hostage by whether someone deems you worthy or not. In essence, you detach from the drama of approval, so it no longer controls your emotions or decisions. Imagine that you share an idea in a meeting and someone rolls their eyes. In the past, you might have felt that eye roll like a punch in the gut, replaying it later and judging your own idea as foolish. Healthy indifference would have you note the reaction, acknowledge it calmly, and continue expressing your viewpoint if it aligns with your honest perspective. You don't ignore the other person entirely, but you don't let that gesture determine your sense of self. This freedom from overreaction creates a sense of emotional spaciousness. You begin to see how many opinions fly around in the world, most of them shaped by factors that have nothing to do with your true character. This chapter's core shift is about cultivating a quiet inner sanctuary that remains intact, even when external judgments swirl. To nurture this, you might visualize yourself as a strong, anchored tree in a field of changing weather. The opinions of others are like gusts of wind or passing clouds, noticeable, but not defining your roots. Spend a few moments each day checking in with how you feel before you look to others for validation or criticism. If you can identify your own emotional state, it becomes easier to remain steady when external feedback arrives. Another approach is to question the importance you assign to any given opinion. Why does a random coworker's offhand comment sting so much? Do they see the whole picture of who you are, or just a sliver? Is their perspective one you genuinely value, or are you giving them power because of an old habit? By pressing pause on your reflex to internalize criticism, you create a buffer zone where you can choose how to respond. In this zone, you can decide if that piece of feedback is constructive or merely a passing remark. Indifference emerges as you see you're not required to internalize every viewpoint that comes your way. Indifference doesn't equate to shutting people out or dismissing legitimate insights. Instead, it's a filter through which you sift opinions. The ones that resonate with your values or help you grow, you retain. The rest, you let go without fuss. Over time, this filter preserves your emotional balance. You're less prone to spiraling into self-doubt or shame when someone criticizes you. You also find you can listen more openly to constructive input because you're no longer conflating critique with personal rejection. By the chapter's end, you might sense a renewed curiosity about how you'll respond to events that used to unravel your self-esteem. Will you shrug off a certain comment that once would have haunted you for days? Perhaps you'll notice yourself caring less about being universally liked. This shift in mindset can be deeply liberating, and it paves the way for a life lived on your own terms, rather than a life spent managing perceptions. Next, we'll turn to an aspect of approval seeking that often goes overlooked. The habit of over-explaining your choices to anyone who questions them, and how to live without that unnecessary burden. Chapter 8. Living without explanation. There's a subtle moment that happens when you're confronted about a decision. Perhaps a friend asks, "Why would you do that?" And you feel the urge to launch into a long-winded justification, as though their simple question puts you on trial. Often, this habit of over-explaining is tied to the belief that you owe everyone a detailed account of your choices in order to remain in their good graces. It becomes second nature to defend yourself before anyone has even suggested that you need to. This chapter focuses on liberating you from that compulsion, helping you see that while openness can be healthy, endless justifications weigh you down and erode your sense of autonomy. Picture a time you wanted to make a lifestyle change, maybe a dietary shift or a career pivot, and well-meaning acquaintances started questioning you. You might have poured out every rationale, fearing they'd think you were foolish or reckless otherwise. Yet notice how seldom this barrage of explanations actually changes anyone's mind. More often, it's you who ends up feeling anxious, as though you're on a hamster wheel trying to prove your choices are valid. The problem isn't sharing your thought process when it's truly helpful. The problem is feeling obligated to explain yourself to anyone who asks, simply to guard against their judgment. Living without explanation doesn't mean never discussing your decisions. It means recognizing that you don't have to justify them as a form of seeking permission. You're allowed to say, "This is what I've chosen," without adding a lengthy backstory unless you genuinely want to share it. By refraining from over-explaining, you claim the space to exist as an individual who doesn't need constant approval. It also signals to others that while you value connection, your choices are not up for public vote. You can ease into this shift by noticing each time you start to explain yourself unprompted. If a friend asks, "Why don't you want dessert?" you might simply answer, "I'm not in the mood," instead of detailing your dietary goals or your health concerns. Observe how you feel in those moments. There might be a flash of discomfort, like you're breaking some unwritten rule of politeness. You may even worry someone will label you as aloof or uncaring. Yet what often happens is far more mundane. People move on, accepting your answer with little fanfare, and in that acceptance, you'll glimpse a new sense of confidence. Over time, cultivating this habit reveals how many of your explanations stem from fear, not curiosity or care. When you pull back from automatically defending your choices, you make room to act from your own intentions, unclouded by potential judgment. The aim is not to become closed off. It's to practice discernment about when and why you share. Instead of reflexively defending yourself, you choose to speak, if and when it adds real value. This fosters clarity in your relationships. You stop resenting people for probing questions, and they learn you don't require ongoing validation to stand by your decisions. As you wrap up this chapter, consider how much time and emotional energy you might reclaim by refusing to explain every aspect of your life. Imagine how liberating it feels to say, "I decided to do this," and leave it at that. This not only strengthens your self-respect, but it also teaches the people around you that your personal choices do not automatically include them as judges. We'll next explore a critical piece of the puzzle, the courage it takes to disappoint people, and why embracing that possibility is essential to building a life that's genuinely your own. Chapter 9. The confidence to disappoint. Disappointment is often a word we avoid like the plague. No one wants to be the reason someone else's hopes or expectations aren't met. Yet tiptoeing around the possibility of disappointing others can trap you in a perpetual cycle of people-pleasing. This chapter asks you to consider the surprising power that comes with accepting your capacity to let others down. Because once you accept it, you're no longer held captive by their approval. Think about a time someone wanted you to do something you didn't truly want or didn't have the bandwidth for. Perhaps a friend insisted on a favor, or a family member tried to steer your career path in a direction that didn't align with your aspirations. You might have gone along with it out of guilt, only to feel resentful later. Or maybe you mustered the courage to say no, only to be overwhelmed with fear that you damaged the relationship beyond repair. The simple truth is that sometimes, in living your truth, you will disappoint people, and that has to be okay if you are to live authentically. One key realization is that disappointing someone doesn't make you bad or unworthy of love. It simply means you have different needs, boundaries, or goals than they do. If someone truly cares for you, they'll respect that, even if it stings initially. If they don't, that's a reflection of where the relationship stands. Embracing this concept grants you the confidence to set boundaries and make choices that honor your well-being. Instead of viewing disappointment as a catastrophic failure, you begin to see it as an unavoidable byproduct of living on your own terms. When you're able to let others down without spiraling into shame, you step into a new level of autonomy. You also experience a counterintuitive form of relief. You no longer have to orchestrate everyone's happiness. This doesn't mean you become callous to how others feel. Rather, you start weighing their feelings alongside your own, instead of defaulting to self-sacrifice. It's a delicate balance to learn that you can care about people deeply while still prioritizing your own truth. One practice that can help is to acknowledge your inner turmoil when faced with a choice that might let someone down. Instead of rushing to please them, sit with the unease. Ask yourself what you really want in that moment. Often, your instincts will reveal a clear preference that contradicts the other person's request. Standing your ground might make you feel guilt or anxiety at first, but consider what it might open up in your life. More time, more integrity, more mental space. Over time, the initial discomfort gives way to a steadier peace, because you're living in alignment with your values. At the end of this chapter, notice if a small spark of courage has taken root. That spark can grow as you realize your world won't end when someone is disappointed by your choice. You can still be kind, caring, and true to yourself. The next step in this journey is to explore the process of reclaiming the parts of you that you've tucked away to keep everyone else content. We'll delve into that in the next chapter, shining a light on the unedited version of who you truly are. Chapter 10. Reclaiming your authenticity. For years, you might have been trimming away pieces of yourself to fit into the roles others cast for you. You shape-shifted, softened edges, or muted your vibrant hues to avoid conflict, to be liked, or to secure approval. This process can be so gradual you hardly notice it until you wake up one day, feeling disconnected from who you used to be. This chapter is about calling those hidden parts back into the light. When you reclaim your authenticity, you not only regain a sense of wholeness, but you also experience a freedom far sweeter than anything you could achieve by trying to please everyone else. Picture authenticity as a homecoming, a return to a place inside yourself that feels both natural and liberating. It doesn't happen overnight, especially if you've spent years performing. But even small acts of genuineness can feel like relief. You might catch yourself about to offer a fake laugh or a half-truth and decide, in that moment, to be real instead. This might mean acknowledging you're not actually amused or admitting you're uncertain about something. These choices can feel risky if you're accustomed to sugarcoating who you are. Yet each act of honesty reaffirms that your true self is worth sharing, even if not everyone receives it graciously. Reclaiming your authenticity also involves understanding where you've conformed out of habit or fear. Perhaps you adopted beliefs that don't resonate with you anymore, or you kept silent about passions that once thrilled you. Often, these adaptations arise from trying to keep the peace or present a polished image. As you scrutinize them, you may find that you yearn to revive old hobbies, friendships, or interests that you pushed aside in your quest for acceptance. Allowing these dormant desires to flourish again can bring a burst of renewed vitality to your life. One empowering realization is that authenticity attracts the people you genuinely resonate with, while it repels those who would never truly appreciate your essence. This can mean some relationships fade out, but the ones that remain or develop tend to be stronger. You become less anxious about meeting new people because you're no longer hiding behind a facade. It's easier to maintain relationships when you're not devoting energy to a persona. It's as though you're stepping into a realm where every connection is more honest, requiring less performance, and that in itself is profoundly liberating. To support this shift, you can explore small experiments in self-expression. Maybe you wear an outfit that feels like you, rather than the one you believe you should wear. Perhaps you speak up about a topic that lights a fire in your heart, even if it risks someone's disdain. As you do these things, notice the sensations in your body, maybe a mixture of exhilaration and nervousness. Over time, the exhilaration can blossom into genuine confidence. You realize that being yourself, while it may come with certain costs, also grants you a priceless sense of alignment with your own life. By the time you close this chapter, a spark of recognition might flare. You recall who you were before you started molding yourself to please others. That memory, or that sense of rediscovered self, is a signpost pointing toward what's possible when you finally release external judgment as your guiding force. The journey continues with deeper insights into how others' opinions will always exist, yet no longer serve as barriers to your growth. In the next set of chapters, we'll explore how historical examples, modern realities, and a fearless engagement with life can help you integrate these insights into a lasting transformation. Chapter 11. The Myth of Universal Approval. If you've ever watched someone you deeply admire only to discover they have critics and detractors, you've seen evidence that no one, no matter how accomplished or beloved, escapes judgment. Yet so many of us remain caught in the illusion that we can somehow earn universal approval if we try hard enough, if we refine ourselves into the perfect image or tiptoe around every potential offense. This chapter questions that persistent fantasy, reminding you that it's not only impossible to please everyone but also undesirable. The energy you pour into chasing universal approval is often at odds with living a life rooted in genuine self-expression. Think of historical figures widely regarded as visionaries or heroes. Almost every one of them had critics. Some faced ridicule, others were ostracized, and still others were condemned outright by those who failed to see their vision. The lesson here isn't that genius is misunderstood. It's that people's perceptions are always filtered through personal biases, fears, and needs. When you cling to the wish that everyone should like or validate you, you're effectively battling an unyielding force, the reality that human beings inevitably have conflicting opinions and values. At first, accepting this can feel like a loss. You might grieve the idea that if you just found the perfect words or polished yourself enough, everyone would admire you. That recognition can become a source of courage. Instead of contorting yourself into what you believe will generate the least backlash, you step forward with clarity and intention. If resistance or criticism surfaces, you learn to see it as part of the natural tapestry of human interaction. You develop a filter that recognizes the difference between thoughtful critique and random negativity, and you stop giving random negativity the power to steer your course. But look at the flip side. Once you stop striving to be universally approved of, you free yourself to focus on resonating with the people who genuinely appreciate what you bring to the world. You also open the door to original thinking, creativity, and risk-taking, all of which can flourish only when you're not stuck performing for the crowd. There may be a sense of relief in recognizing you can't possibly appease every critic or capture every compliment. One tangible way to put this into practice is by deliberately expressing an opinion or taste that might invite disagreement. Perhaps you post a piece of creative work or share a viewpoint that you suspect isn't widely held in your circle. Then observe the reactions without racing to defend or retract your stance. Notice how some people might align with it wholeheartedly, while others disregard or even scorn it. By choosing not to chase universal acceptance, you give yourself permission to explore your genuine perspective and offer it freely. The real challenge is to stand calmly in that space where you might feel exposed, trusting that not everyone's reaction needs to be positive for you to remain grounded. This chapter closes with a reminder that the myth of universal approval is just that, a myth. It invites you to see beyond the fairy tale where everyone applauds your every move. As you recognize the inevitability of differing opinions, you can focus on meeting your own standards. The next step in our journey will highlight how fear often masquerades as pragmatism or caution, and why choosing freedom over fear can lead you to a life marked by authenticity and self-determination. Chapter 12. Fear versus freedom. Few things color our choices as profoundly as fear. Yet fear is a master of disguise. It might dress up as caution, wisdom, or even moral high ground, keeping you locked inside your comfort zone under the pretense of doing what's safe. The tension between fear and freedom underlies every decision to remain silent or speak up, to hide or to be seen, to maintain the status quo or to push into new territory. This chapter invites you to notice where fear is masquerading as something else, and to envision a life guided by the expansive possibilities of freedom rather than the constrictions of anxiety. You can begin by reflecting on recent decisions that felt uneasy. Maybe you declined an opportunity because your mind conjured worst-case scenarios, or you hesitated to share your perspective in a group because the risk of looking foolish loomed too large. Fear might have seemed logical at that moment, offering a handy excuse that you weren't ready or it wasn't the right time. But if you look closer, you might see that fear was stealing the wheel. Recognizing that is a significant awakening, one that dissolves the illusion that your actions are guided solely by logic. Choosing freedom over fear doesn't mean recklessly discarding caution. It means acknowledging that growth, creativity, and meaningful connections are often born out of moments where you're uncertain. When you decide to navigate through fear instead of surrendering to it, you tap into hidden reserves of resourcefulness and courage. This process can start small. You might volunteer for a new project at work, even if you're afraid you won't excel immediately, or share a personal anecdote in a gathering where you'd typically stay silent. Each time you face fear head-on, you prove to yourself that discomfort is survivable and can even be a catalyst for something extraordinary. In that sense, freedom is the mental and emotional space in which you realize your capacity to act despite fear. Freedom doesn't eradicate fear. Rather, it puts fear in the passenger seat instead of the driver's seat. You begin to sense an expansive possibility that was hidden before. Fear demands you shrink back. Freedom urges you to expand. Over time, these choices accumulate. What starts as small acts of bravery, speaking up, stepping forward, risking judgment, builds into a broader sense of self-trust. You realize that many of the constraints you once believed were real were merely illusions built from worst-case scenarios. A vivid way to internalize this shift is to keep a simple mental ledger of instances where you acted out of freedom instead of fear. Did you accept an invitation to something unfamiliar? Did you say yes to a creative opportunity despite uncertainty? Did you voice an opinion that went against the grain? Each time you do so, note how it feels to stand in the space of your own power. Even if the outcome isn't perfect, the act itself is liberating because it affirms you're no longer captive to other people's judgments or your worst fears. As you step away from fear-driven living, you'll find that external approval naturally takes a back seat. You come to value the learning process more than the guarantee of a perfect outcome. This sets the stage for a transformative perspective on solitude, why standing alone can be a crucible for discovering unshakable self-confidence. We'll journey into that territory next, learning how solitude becomes a teacher rather than a sentence. Chapter 13. Strength in Solitude. Modern life doesn't always encourage solitude. We're connected by social media, bombarded by messages, and constantly aware of other people's opinions. Solitude can feel stark or lonely, but it also holds a powerful secret. It's often in solitary moments that you confront your real feelings, free from the noise of external influences. This chapter focuses on how solitude can become an ally, a space where you strengthen your self-knowledge and bolster the conviction to live authentically, regardless of what others think. Think about the subtle sense of relief you might feel when you spend time alone in a calm environment. Maybe it's a quiet walk, a few hours in your room, or even a solo trip. In those moments, you can let your guard down. You're not performing or adjusting for anyone else's expectations. That exhale you experience is a gateway to hearing your own thoughts with greater clarity. For some, this is uncomfortable at first, because you might come face to face with doubts, regrets, or fears you've been suppressing. Yet it's in acknowledging these inner voices that you begin to transmute them into honesty and power. Solitude also offers a break from the constant feed of input, friends' ideas, internet chatter, or cultural norms, allowing you to question which beliefs are genuinely your own. In the silence, you can discern what feels authentically right, whether that pertains to your career, relationships, or personal values. It might be a gradual process, akin to peeling back layers of other people's narratives until you arrive at a core that resonates with your spirit. One practical way to embrace solitude is to intentionally carve out small pockets of it in your daily life. You might designate 15 minutes each morning to sit quietly, perhaps journaling or simply letting your thoughts settle. Notice which mental scripts arise, and ask yourself if they align with your sense of purpose or if they're echoes of someone else's expectations. Over time, these quiet check-ins become a touchstone for aligning your external actions with your internal truth. A critical element here is learning to distinguish between solitude and isolation. Solitude is a chosen space for self-reflection and renewal. Isolation is a forced or unwanted separation that can breed loneliness. When you embrace solitude intentionally, you do so with the understanding that it's a resource, not a punishment. You're stepping away from external voices to better hear your internal one, so that when you do re-engage with the world, you do so from a place of authenticity. As you integrate solitude into your life, you'll likely notice a newfound resilience. When you're faced with disapproval or misunderstandings, the grounded sense of self you cultivated in solitude can buffer the impact. You realize that even if the world around you doesn't offer immediate validation, you still have an inner wellspring of certainty. This becomes the foundation for a courage that doesn't depend on applause. And as we move forward, we'll explore how stepping confidently into visibility can become a natural extension of this inner solidity rather than a quest for external affirmation. Chapter 14. The courage to be seen. To be seen is to stand in the light where people can form opinions about you, where they might judge, praise, or question who you are. For many, this is the sharpest edge of vulnerability. You might have spent years developing protective mechanisms to avoid scrutiny, blending in, downplaying your aspirations, or hiding quirks that mark you as different. Yet true confidence doesn't come from never being judged. It comes from allowing yourself to be visible and deciding that other people's judgments can't determine your worth. Reflect on the instances when you did step out into a spotlight, whether literal or metaphorical. Perhaps you auditioned for a part, applied for a competitive position, or posted something heartfelt on social media. The flutter in your chest might have signaled excitement and fear colliding. That collision is precisely where courage is born. Even if the outcome wasn't as you hoped, the act of stepping forward often ignites a self-respect far deeper than any external validation could provide. Being seen also means being open to both criticism and connection. Ironically, in trying to avoid one, you may forfeit the other. If you hide your talents or voice, you might dodge criticism, but you also miss out on the genuine connections that form when people resonate with your authenticity. Courageous visibility asks you to accept that some will misunderstand or dislike you, while others might find inspiration or camaraderie in what you share. A good exercise to nurture this courage is to identify a small but meaningful way to show up in the world. Maybe you volunteer to speak first in a group setting, display a personal project you've been working on, or share an opinion you typically keep tucked away. Notice the trembling mixture of anxiety and adrenaline that might surface. Instead of trying to suppress it, recognize it as a normal response to being vulnerable. In fact, let it remind you that you're pushing into a territory where growth happens. Over time, repeated acts of being seen start to shift your perspective on external judgments. They become data points rather than definitive statements about your self-worth. You might glean useful insights from certain critiques, while discarding comments that stem from ignorance or malice. Through all of this, you learn you're not responsible for how others respond. You're responsible for the honesty of your expression. The more you practice this stance, the more natural it feels to occupy space without apology. By letting yourself be fully seen, flaws and all, you tap into a reservoir of authenticity that can't be replicated by playing small or safe. This is the kind of authenticity that fosters real intimacy in relationships, sparks creativity, and ultimately makes your life a reflection of who you truly are. As you prepare for the next chapter, you'll delve into the art of taking feedback and judgments in stride, a skill that solidifies the resilience you're building. We'll explore why most judgments aren't personal at all, and how disentangling yourself from them brings profound emotional freedom. Chapter 15. The Art of Not Taking It Personally. It's so easy to believe that every cutting remark or disapproving look is a direct indictment of your character. You might find yourself reading between the lines, seeing hidden criticism where none was intended, or absorbing harsh feedback as if it's a statement of absolute truth. This chapter explores the liberating recognition that most judgments aren't actually about you at all. They're projections of other people's experiences, biases, and emotional states. By learning to hold opinions at arm's length, you soften their power to wound you. Consider how often someone's rudeness is more about their bad day, stress level, or personal triggers than about any flaw of yours. That knowledge alone can transform your reactions. Instead of agonizing over what you did wrong, you begin to see the bigger picture. The other person is dealing with their own issues. Adopting this perspective doesn't mean you dismiss all feedback. You remain open to growth, but you filter what's constructive from what's simply another person's emotional spillover. You might also reflect on times you judged someone harshly, only to realize later that your own frustrations or misunderstandings drove your reaction. Maybe you were feeling insecure, and their confidence rubbed you the wrong way. Or you had a preconceived notion that colored everything they said. Recognizing how frequently your judgments arise from personal factors helps you see that the reverse is true too. When someone criticizes you, it may reveal more about them than it does about you. One way to practice not taking things personally is to pause before reacting to any criticism. Instead of reflexively defending yourself or retreating into hurt, take a mental step back. Ask whether the feedback holds useful insight into your behavior or if it's a surface-level swipe that says more about the other person's state of mind. If it's useful, thank them, internally or verbally, and integrate what resonates. If it's not, release it without letting it gnaw at your self-esteem. This can feel awkward at first, because you might be accustomed to automatically internalizing negativity, but with time, it becomes second nature. Developing this detachment also fosters a more compassionate understanding of others. You see that everyone is wrestling with their own internal battles. Their opinions about you often reflect those struggles, rather than an unbiased assessment of who you are. This perspective doesn't turn you into a doormat. You can still call out disrespect or protect your boundaries. It merely means you don't adopt an emotional burden that isn't yours to carry. By the close of this chapter, you'll likely sense a new buoyancy in how you handle opinions and judgments. They become lighter, more fluid, and less central to your sense of self. With that newfound ease, you unlock a deeper confidence to move through the world, unburdened by the endless task of proving yourself to others. In the next set of chapters, we'll push forward into the closing stretches of this journey, cementing the understanding that your life, your rules, isn't just a rebellious catchphrase, but the essential foundation of a deeply fulfilling way of being. Chapter 16. Your Life, Your Rules. Every morning, you wake up in a world filled with unwritten rules, people telling you how to behave, what success looks like, and which paths are respectable. You might find yourself subconsciously following these prescriptions without ever asking whose rules they really are. This chapter invites you to pause and consider just how many decisions you've made to fit norms that you never consciously chose. Rather than living by standards set by family, society, or friends, you begin to craft a life defined by your personal values and desires. Think back to a choice you made recently, a small decision about how you spent your weekend, or a major move like switching careers. If you peel back the layers, you might notice hints of external influence. Perhaps you hesitated to start a creative project because it didn't align with your peers' idea of productivity. Or you dressed in a way that felt safe, never pausing to wonder if it reflected who you truly are. These choices feel mundane, but added up over time, they create the overarching direction of your life. Giving yourself permission to rewrite the rules can feel like standing at a cliff's edge, contemplating a leap. Uncertainty rises. Will people judge you? Will you fail? Yet you stand to gain a radical sense of ownership over your existence. When you decide your life belongs to you, old fears of disapproval begin to lose their grip. You might initially face resistance from those who benefited from your compliance, but that's often a sign you're breaking free from patterns that kept you small. A practical step here is to list the assumptions you've inherited, what you believe about success, relationships, or identity, and then question each one. Is it yours, or did you absorb it from someone else? Could you rewrite it to reflect what you've discovered about yourself? For instance, if you've always believed you should remain in a job for stability, but your heart longs for something more adventurous, you can begin pivoting in small, steady increments. You don't have to dismantle your life overnight, but each redefined rule acts as a key that unlocks more freedom. Over time, these shifts accumulate. You start saying no to invitations that don't align with your priorities, even if declining feels awkward at first. You approach goals in unconventional ways because you trust your instincts more than the rulebook everyone else seems to follow. It might look messy from the outside, but on the inside, you sense a quiet integrity taking root. That integrity grows each time you make a choice rooted in your principles, rather than crowd-pleasing. It's normal to feel some turbulence as you implement new rules, your rules. People close to you might question or even criticize your changes. Strangely enough, this discomfort confirms that you're stepping off the well-worn path of people-pleasing. Each time you choose authenticity over obligation, you reinforce that your life is yours to direct. You'll likely begin to experience an inner calm, a sense of alignment that was missing when you were perpetually scanning for external cues. As this chapter concludes, reflect on how many decisions in a single day might be influenced by expectations you never authorized. Even noticing this can spark a profound shift. You realize you aren't simply a product of your environment. You're an active agent with the power to dismantle and rebuild your own framework. That's where real autonomy lies. It's also the mindset that sets the stage for the next chapter, where you'll tap into the extraordinary potential of a mind unchained by the burdens of external validation or fear-based thinking. Chapter 17. The Power of a Mind Unchained. Imagine walking down a busy street without the familiar undercurrent of self-consciousness. Your mind feels as if it's been freed from invisible shackles. That's the sensation of an unchained mind, one that doesn't waste energy on scanning for judgment or contorting itself to fit outside opinions. In this chapter, you'll explore how your mental landscape transforms when it's no longer hostage to external validation. Think back to how often your thoughts loop around worry. Did I say something stupid? Will they still like me if I do this? Am I coming across the right way? That mental chatter can devour your creativity, your joy, and your willingness to take even small risks. When you begin releasing the grip of such worries, you discover that your cognitive space expands. Suddenly, there's room for new ideas, fresh perspectives, and deeper self-discovery. An unchained mind doesn't mean you stop caring about other humans or become indifferent to real feedback. Instead, you stop seeing every bit of feedback as a make-or-break verdict on your worth. Critique becomes information rather than a personal affront, and praise becomes pleasant but non-essential. That shift in perspective frees up energy you once used to manage impressions. With that energy, you can delve into areas you've been ignoring, learning new skills, exploring spiritual practices, or even forging deeper connections with people who truly resonate with you. A useful practice is to notice when you begin second-guessing yourself out of fear of judgment. Pause and ask, if I didn't care about looking foolish, what would I do right now? Try to follow through on that action. It might be speaking up in a meeting, wearing something bold, or simply sharing an authentic opinion instead of the safe one. Each time you do this, you chip away at the mental walls that keep you hemmed in. Over time, you'll sense a growing ease in being exactly who you are, even if it feels a bit raw or exposed initially. This mental liberation also transforms relationships. When you're not perpetually self-editing, you show up in a more genuine way, which can deepen trust and emotional intimacy. People who value authenticity will likely gravitate closer, while those who relied on your compliance may distance themselves. Though that can cause short-term pangs of grief, it ultimately creates a healthier social environment where your unchained mind can flourish. You might also discover a renewed sense of wonder about life, possibilities, and even your own identity. Free from the constant drain of approval-seeking, your curiosity reawakens. You might find yourself learning a new language for the sheer joy of it, or exploring a side project that's always intrigued you. This doesn't mean you never feel fear, but it does mean you treat fear as a signal rather than a directive. You become more aware that you can feel afraid and still choose to do what lights you up, unhindered by the question of who might be judging. As you close this chapter, rest for a moment in the possibility that your mind, unchained from relentless self-critique, is a powerful, creative force. This is where you start living from genuine inspiration rather than reactive self-defense. The next chapter will explore how to lock in these changes, ensuring they aren't fleeting, but become part of a lasting transformation. That's where integration comes in. This chapter explores how to consolidate each lesson so that you experience true continuity between your thoughts, feelings, and actions. Picture your transformation as a jigsaw puzzle. Each chapter offered a piece: awareness of fear, understanding of approval-seeking, tools for boundary setting, and so forth. Integration means clicking those pieces together into a bigger picture of who you're becoming. You'll see that true inner freedom is not a temporary high, but a sustainable way of interacting with yourself and the world. Chapter 18. Integration. All the concepts you've encountered: freedom from judgment, the courage to stand alone, the willingness to disappoint, the power of a mind at ease, can feel invigorating, yet also overwhelming. You might wonder how to weave these insights into a coherent way of life, rather than letting them remain as separate ideas. It starts by reviewing each insight, noticing which areas came more naturally to you and which ones felt more challenging. If you found it easy to stop over-explaining, but difficult to handle disapproval, for example, that signals where you might focus a bit more. A helpful approach is to create small daily or weekly rituals that reinforce these lessons. Maybe you spend a few minutes each night journaling about moments when you caught yourself seeking validation, or you celebrate every time you showed up authentically without editing yourself. By regularly tuning into these insights, you prevent old habits from sneaking back in. It's a gentle, continuous process, like tending a garden rather than installing a permanent fixture. Integration also involves bringing the people closest to you into your journey. You don't owe them a detailed explanation, but sharing snippets can create mutual understanding. Telling a friend, "I'm trying to worry less about what others think, so if you notice me being quieter or more direct, it's intentional," might feel vulnerable. Yet it often encourages supportive feedback and decreases the likelihood of misunderstandings. Real connections thrive in this environment of open communication, and you might be surprised how many people relate to what you're going through. At times, you might slip back into old patterns of anxiety or people-pleasing. Rather than viewing these instances as failures, treat them as signals that you're still human. Integration isn't about perfection, it's about consistency over the long haul. When you regress, observe what triggered you. Was it an environment reminiscent of your past, a particular family member whose approval you've always sought? Identifying these triggers can help you respond differently the next time. Think of integration as a layering process rather than a single leap. Each new awareness settles into your routine, shaping how you move through everyday life. Over time, strangers might comment on your new vibe, or friends may notice a steadier energy about you. This is evidence of the shift from conceptual understanding to embodied transformation. The ultimate goal is that these lessons become second nature, a new default setting in which you operate from self-trust and authenticity rather than fear. As you complete this chapter, envision yourself as an evolving tapestry, each thread representing a piece of hard-earned insight. When woven together, they form a fabric that supports you in every aspect of life. Soon, you'll notice that caring less about external approval isn't something you have to constantly remind yourself to do. It simply becomes who you are. In the next chapter, we'll delve into how this integrated transformation echoes through your daily experiences, creating a resonance that draws positive opportunities, people, and experiences into your life. Chapter 19. The Echo of Freedom. As you settle into your new way of being, you'll notice a subtle echo reverberating through your daily life. Decisions that once caused anxiety may now spark curiosity or even excitement. Interactions where you used to tense up are now more fluid, and conversations flow without the constant internal monitor. This ripple effect, what we call the echo of freedom, touches everything from how you schedule your time to the tone of your relationships. One of the most striking changes is a sense of emotional lightness. When you're not bracing for judgment at every turn, you become more present. You can listen more fully to others because your mind isn't split between hearing them and obsessing over how they perceive you. You can give genuine compliments without wondering if they'll be reciprocated. Small, everyday experiences, like enjoying a meal or taking a walk, become richer because you're no longer weighed down by unspoken fears. This echo of freedom also manifests in your willingness to explore new possibilities. Maybe you take up a hobby you've always been curious about, or you reach out to someone you admire. Fear of looking unpolished or being rejected now holds less sway, and that liberated energy can lead to delightful surprises, new friendships, skills, or insights you'd have missed if you stayed hidden. It's not that rejection never happens. It's that it no longer feels catastrophic. Relationships can enter a deeper phase. You feel safer showing your full range of emotions, joy, anger, grief, vulnerability, because you trust that your worth isn't tied to hiding your authentic self. This honesty can inspire others to do the same, creating a collective environment where superficial niceties give way to genuine bonds. Yet don't be alarmed if some relationships shift or fade. The echo of freedom often acts as a sorting mechanism, aligning you with those who genuinely support your growth. At work or in creative endeavors, you might notice an increased clarity about your goals and motivations. Rather than guessing what will earn applause, you ask yourself what genuinely excites and challenges you. This shift in perspective can lead to a type of flow in your tasks, where time passes quickly and you're absorbed in creating or problem-solving. External feedback is still welcomed, but it no longer dictates the path you take. If you ever doubt this echo of freedom, remind yourself how far you've come from the days when other people's opinions felt like make-or-break verdicts. It's crucial to occasionally look back, not to dwell on the past, but to appreciate the distance you've traveled. Notice how your emotional triggers, once immediate and intense, have softened. Appreciate how your decision-making process has become more aligned with your values. These observations aren't vanity. They're checkpoints confirming that your transformation is real. By the time you finish this chapter, you may feel a strengthening conviction that you're on a path of ongoing growth and self-discovery. You're no longer chasing a final destination where you're fixed or immune to all fear. Instead, you're confidently navigating life's fluctuations, guided by an inner compass rather than the noise of external judgment. In the final chapter, we'll bring everything together, turning your attention to the enduring freedom that emerges when fear no longer calls the shots and authenticity becomes your baseline. Chapter 20. The End of Fear. When you hear the phrase, the end of fear, you might imagine never feeling afraid again, as though you've developed some supernatural immunity to anxiety. But ending fear in this context isn't about eradicating a normal human emotion. It's about recognizing that fear no longer defines your identity or dictates your actions. You can experience apprehension, step forward anyway, and refuse to measure your worth by others' reactions. Look back on the themes we've explored. You've learned to spot how approval-seeking robs you of self-ownership, how letting go of control creates liberation, and how embracing authenticity leads to genuine connections and personal growth. This journey is more than a collection of tips. It's a fundamental shift in who you choose to be. Even if a flicker of fear arises, you see it for what it is, a passing sensation, not a verdict on your capabilities or worthiness. Picture your life moving forward under this new premise. You take on challenges, even if they come with the risk of failing. You speak up for your values, knowing some people might disagree. You seek solitude without feeling lonely, and you let yourself be seen without constantly managing how others perceive you. Each action flows from a deep reservoir of self-trust built through every chapter's lessons. On a practical level, you might mark this transition by setting a personal milestone, something symbolic that you've avoided out of fear of judgment. It might be sharing your art, having a vulnerable conversation with someone important, or entering a new phase in your career. Approach it not as a grand finale, but as a living testament to the freedom you've cultivated. The moment you follow through, you affirm your decision to live from authenticity rather than from anxious overthinking. As this chapter nears its conclusion, you might feel a wave of gratitude for the courage and honesty you've mustered. If there's one thing to carry with you, it's that the practice of not caring about what others think isn't a singular event. It's a mindset you nurture daily. You'll encounter new situations that challenge your resolve, but each time you have the choice to return to the principles you've internalized: self-respect, acceptance of risk, empathy without subservience, and the thrill of living life on your own terms. This is the end of fear in the sense that fear no longer reigns supreme. It becomes one voice among many in your internal chorus, and it's a quieter voice at that. Your life is now shaped by what you genuinely value, rather than by reflexive accommodation of external judgment. That's a profound liberation, one that grows stronger with every choice you make in alignment with who you truly are. No matter where your path leads next, you step onto it with clarity. You've dismantled the illusions that kept you small and discovered a well of courage hidden beneath the longing for approval. Most importantly, you've embraced your right to exist on your own terms. That right isn't something you earn, it's something you claim. In claiming it, you transform how you move through the world, free from the weight of trying to be everything for everyone. That is the essence of how to stop caring about what others think, and it marks the beginning of living from the deepest truth of who you are.